Good evening and welcome to this live book launch event here in southwest London. I'm Alice Thorneycroft, and for the next hour I have the enormous pleasure of spending time with John Hambly, the author of Samson Rising. Samson Rising is a wonderful, heartfelt, true story of a Cornish lad who found inspiration through sport and strength in adversity. I'll be chatting to John here in the studio about his extraordinary book in a safe, socially distanced manner. We have two distinguished guests joining us this evening, Jason Leonard and Andy Gomersall, who will be sharing their thoughts on some of the themes that Samson Rising explores. If you'd like to get involved and ask a question, then please do use the Q&A facility on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the hour. We have a truly global audience joining us this evening, ladies and gentlemen, from the wild moorland landscapes of the Cornish coastline all the way through to the vast and fertile plains of New Zealand. Wherever you're watching this evening, a warm welcome to you all. So let's meet the man himself, author of Samson Rising, John Hambly. John, welcome.
Hi, Alice. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And first of all, I have to mention your beautiful shirt there. Very proud Cornishman.
Got to wear it, haven't I?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I have had the pleasure of reading your book twice, and I'm not just saying this, I literally couldn't put it down. All 292 pages, I believe.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell me, did you ever think you'd be an author?
No, I had no aspirations to write a book, but I got going one day writing a few notes while I was sitting in the oxygen chamber at the Samson Centre, and a few threads started to come together, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do anything with this, how am I going to end up finishing the book? And the obvious thing was to finish building the Samson Centre. So that's why it took me 5 years to write, because we were still developing the facility over that period. But yeah, the recollections that you read in the book all came really from the oxygen chamber.
Now, Samson Rising is a tale of good and bad fortune, but I have to say there's an optimism in your writing. Have you always been the type of chap that's a glass half full type of person?
Well, if it was half full, I'd probably drink it, but I'm generally quite upbeat. I mean, MS is a punishing disease, but I try and make the best of the good times. And that's been the way most of my life. I've tended to look at things in that direction. There's no point in getting too down on yourself, in my view.
Now, you were born and brought up in a rough council estate in Truro. However, when I look at the front cover of your beautiful book here, I see the iconic St Michael's Mount, and having a dad that lives in Cornwall, I know this view very well. What's the meaning for you behind this particular view?
Well, as you will know from reading the book, I was a lover of fishing, and I spent a huge amount of time fishing on that bay, Mounts Bay, and always loved the view of St Michael's Mount, whatever time of the day. But the most beautiful time for me was fishing when the sun came up, and that sort of is quite symbolic to me in that I'm not letting the sun go down. The view is that the sun is coming up in my life, no matter what is going on in that particular day. And I think the sight of the tide having gone out as well is quite iconic, because it's a fantastic view across that bay when the tide is in or out. But for me, it was that image had to be captured on the front of the book.
It's stunning, and the book covers so many themes. I was really taken back by the sense of place and connection to Cornwall. There's lovely descriptions of people who have had big influences on you growing up. The sense of community and the idea of team, and of course rugby. But one of the overriding themes for me is this idea of strength overcoming adversity. And there's a particular chapter in this book, and it's called Staring Down the Barrel. And if I may, I'd just like to read back to you the beginning of that chapter. I suppose it's only natural that people live in fear of the day that they might be diagnosed with something life-threatening or life-changing. The day that everything you take for granted comes to a shuddering halt and you have to address your own mortality. It is a simple fact of life. It will happen to most of us, and yet when it arrives, the chasm that opens up can be so broad and deep, you are swallowed up in a silent swirl of emotion. Any rationale you might have contemplated deploying at such a moment is swept away from you in a few seconds. Can you describe to me the moment you discovered you had MS?
Yeah, I mean, to say it was staring down the barrel would not be too far away from the feeling at the time. I was completely caught out by the diagnosis. I thought that I had a virus, and they initially told me that in hospital. So when I had a private consultant that I went to see, and I wasn't expecting it. And the moment he dropped those two words into the equation, I knew what multiple sclerosis was because I designed aids and adaptation schemes for people with MS, and I just immediately thought of those images of those people that I'd built places for, and it was a moment in my life where I felt as though I'd been hit by a train. You know, the consultant was talking to me, but I just didn't hear anything he was saying, and it was numbing. Yeah.
And you were 36, how old were you?
Yeah, 36.
36. Now, immediately after your diagnosis, you reached out to the community and you looked for places to support MS sufferers, and you met a dynamic small group of passionate individuals. And you had big ambitions, didn't you, John? Tell me about how the birth of the Samson Centre came about.
Well, the birth of the idea of the Samson Centre was really my frustration and a bit of anxiety that I couldn't get treatment. We all love the NHS, particularly at the moment, but back in the late 90s, there just wasn't the facilities or the service, particularly in the way of physiotherapy, to get assistance. And the reason I looked around was to see if there were any local self-help groups. I stumbled across the MS therapy group of Guildford, who were just working out of a village hall. And I thought, this is really good. I'm getting a lot out of this. But, it was a cold village hall, no equipment, and it was limited. And putting my surveying hat on, I wondered whether I could put a scheme forward that was feasible. But then I had the problem of, I had no fundraising experience other than perhaps running the London Marathon several years before for a charity. So I was in unknown territory in terms of raising the money. And of course I had to get that group on board as well, which wasn't a done deal by any means.
But you have a bit of a knack, don't you, at motivating and cajoling and inspiring. How does that work? Come on.
I'm not sure, really. I think I talk honestly to people. I tell people what I would like to happen. If they don't like it and they come across with other ideas, then, it's a team thing. Try and embrace it and move forward together. And I've always done that ever since I found my confidence as a kid, setting up a small fishing club in Truro, to going on to obviously captaining a rugby team, and working within teams as a surveyor. So, yeah, it's always been a big thing for me. Perhaps safety in numbers. I can't work on my own.
Now, tell me a little bit about how the Samson Centre helps people with MS, for those people listening who don't know it.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable place. When we set up, our main operation was probably physiotherapy, but we now have a fully equipped gymnasium, which we share with our co-lessees, the Way Kayak Club and the British Sub Aqua Club. But it's a great facility. One of the things I used to say when I did talks, when I was trying to promote the centre, was that the old adage used to be, if you've got MS, just take it easy. But I had a feeling that what the physios were doing in terms of keeping muscles moving and stretching you was great, but what if you could exercise to some degree like you used to when you were fit and well? And that's where the gymnasium comes in. We've got a fitness team. And then from there, we've developed this oxygen facility, which is started out as just 2 small chambers, but we now have a complete oxygen centre. And it's, I think we're treating about doing 10,000 treatments a year for over 200 people with MS. So it's certainly filling its place.
And tell me how the oxygen tanks actually help.
Yeah, I wish I knew, actually. It's very technical. The remarkable thing was I attended a lecture held in the Bedford MS Centre shortly after we got established in Guildford, and there was a gentleman chatting called Professor James, who's the emeritus professor of oxygen therapy in the UK. And he was talking about the benefits of oxygen for MS. And I went up to him after the lecture and just said, I'm really interested in setting something up in Guildford. Do you think this would be possible for a team that have no idea about oxygen therapy? And Philip, he acknowledged I was asking the question, but he was being inundated with others, and I thought nothing more of it. And then about 3 weeks later, I got a call from him saying, I've got a chamber that's available up in Scotland. Would you like it? And I'm like, yeah, great. It arrived bubble wrapped in about 2 weeks' time, and I had no idea what to do with it.
Extraordinary.
But there was a gentleman there, coincidence again, who knew Professor James, who had experience of oxygen chambers. And it went from there. We rigged it up in Cyril's garage, and
I remember Cyril from the book.
yes. Cyril's a great character, and I started using it with him, treating him because he was unwell at the time. So he taught me how to use the chamber, and I got better. So I was suffering with a lot of urinary infections at the time, which with MS are very debilitating. And Cyril said to me one day, haven't you forgotten something? We always used to go out to the back of his house and sit and have a coffee after the treatments. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. He says, how about your crutches? They're still in the garage. So I got out the chamber and just walked through the house. So I couldn't explain to you in scientific detail how it works. Well, I could, but someone would probably have a real go at me. I know that a huge number of people, not only MS sufferers, but also people with cancer, people with other autoimmune diseases, and sportsmen are getting benefit from it as well. So.
Well, it's interesting you raise that because we have a special guest joining us remotely to tell us a little bit more about how he came to know the Samson Centre in Guildford. Please welcome a rugby legend, 114 England caps, 3 British and Irish Lion Tours, 4 Grand Slams and a Rugby World Cup victory amongst his many achievements, Jason Leonard. Good afternoon, good evening, Jason.
He's gone.
He's gone. He's there. He's there. He's there.
I'm trying to find out. I'm somewhere. Hold on.
Hello. He's back. Here he is.
Hi, Jace.
Hello, John.
How are you
Nice
doing?
to see you, mate. Thanks very much.
Great to see you, mate.
Look, we just heard about the Samson Centre and how it's helping hundreds of MS sufferers. But tell me what your experience of the centre is, Jason.
I got invited down to the centre years ago. As a prop forward, we have not got much sense in that aspect. I broke an ankle and tried to run it off for about 10 minutes. So what ended up happening was I needed a little bit of rest in that aspect. And John being ahead of the game said, look, come down to the centre, see what it's like. So I spent a bit of time in the chambers, which again, it made me heal quicker in that aspect, but also knowing John's condition and some of the people that was using it, so it's trying to help the local community, but also help the sporting community, not just professionals but amateurs as well and stuff like that. So it was a great fit. But knowing John before that, because we did a couple of rugby games, which was great fun at John's club, the Old Actonians, which every year started getting a little bit more meatier every year. John.
It did, yeah. Mostly
First year
down to you,
was
Jason.
not to me. I was trying to get out of it. Every year I was trying to get out of it. But it was just great fun. But it was also showing support, for John, but also for sufferers like John, and with Samson Centre as well, as in awareness and how we can do a bit more. And it's not just for that as well. As I said, I broke an ankle, and I'd say using the chamber most probably helped me heal quicker than what it would have been without. So it was definitely a huge win-win for me.
Can you just tell me how rugby shaped your character?
I think it's a tough one, really. It's not easy. Like John, not coming from a great background in that aspect. I grew up with a load of kids that a lot of kids are still in jail. They ended up on the wrong side of the law. A couple of kids from my school are no longer with us. They've been in trouble with violence and died and stuff like that. I suppose the thing with rugby is it's a family, and you most probably you want to be playing on the right team, not the wrong team. So the thing with rugby is, and again, a lot of kids get shown the opportunity to go down the wrong road, but because of rugby, you've got a load of teammates and people that are helping you say, no, don't do that, don't hang out with those kids, come this way. So you end up playing for the right team to a certain degree, instead of playing for the wrong team. With rugby and the values that rugby has, you end up playing for the right team.
Yep, agree with that entirely.
And the current climate, obviously, I'm just going to ask you a quick question about this. It's tough for sport right now. It's rugby's no exception. Have you any examples of rugby clubs, stepping up during this time and what they've been doing? Because it's been really tough.
Again, I think rugby being a central part of the community, a little bit like what John said in that aspect. What the beauty of rugby is, even though, there's a rugby sport per se can't go ahead, but the rugby clubs have been going out in their communities doing food drops, parcels, whatever it would be, looking after the elderly, the self-isolating, making sure that they're okay and stuff like that. And that's what rugby's all about. It's a team game. It's once you become part of a rugby club, you become part of the rugby family, and you don't leave anyone behind. You don't leave anyone on their own. And sadly, at this moment in time, with what's going on before, and even more so now, you can just see rugby clubs saying, okay, well, we're all fit and healthy at this moment in time, not touching wood in that aspect, but we know a ton of people from the community that's mostly not. Well, let us, as a rugby club, go and help them with food or food drops or whatever it would be, and stuff like that, making sure that they're not out of the community cycle in that aspect. So rugby clubs across the board, I mean, that's up and down the country actually, have really stepped up to this crisis. And whilst there's no rugby being played, it's part of the community. That's the real big thing about it, is how can we help others, and that's what the rugby family is all about.
Thank you so much, Jason. And finally, is there anything you want to say to John? It's a big night for him. It's a huge achievement writing this book. It's such a beautiful book. Anything you want to say to John just before we finish?
No, I think it's great that John's actually managed to find the time to do it, because actually, if you know John well, he's always up to something. He's always doing something. So I'm surprised he actually managed to find the time to do it. But I think to credit John is what he gives back. So a little bit like what we're saying with the rugby family, the rugby community, him as an individual, what he gives back, not only to the rugby community, but to the community at large. And especially with the Samson Centre and And again, I've been down there and I've given him an awards and plaques and this and the other. But he's always there and he's always doing stuff. He's at the forefront of everything and he's driving stuff and he's this, that and the other. Even though his own condition is by nature deteriorating, his appetite for doing stuff has not diminished at all. He's not only a credit to his family, the community, rugby. He's just a great bloke. He's an absolute great bloke.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that, mate.
John, you know that.
Yeah, you're a star yourself.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jason. We really appreciate you making time for us this evening. Thank you and have a great evening. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Oh, wasn't that lovely?
Lovely.
Absolutely lovely. Look, one rugby playing legend to another. We have Andy Gomersall here in the studio, obviously former professional rugby player, World Cup winner and business owner now of N2S, joining us in the studio. Andy, welcome.
Hi, Alex.
Now, you recently presented an award to John. I was actually there, so I remember the night. But more importantly, what did you most enjoy about his book?
Well, it started so well, and that was the foreword by Dylan. I thought Dylan Hartley, former England captain, wrote so beautifully. And what surprised me was that he's a forward and John's a forward, and the words, some big words in there. That was the first thing that surprised me about the book. Only a bat can say that. And
we were just saying actually earlier, weren't we? It hasn't been ghost. You wrote every word. Absolutely.
John was straight back at me.
Yes.
No banter aside, God, I wrote it. Watch it. He's coming swinging for me. I think I spoke to John about it this evening, that when you start reading it, there are so many likes to your own sort of upbringing, and there's so many sort of parallels of times in your life, which is amazing. The start of the book and growing up as a child, family, where you live, because you don't choose that, do you? At the end of the day, when you're a kid, you don't choose where you live and the beautiful Cornwall and what that gives you. But it also had challenges, and every person can look back at their childhood and think about those situations and scenarios. School, my children are going through challenges at school right now. So, and I had those, and just every step of the way in John's life, they're just great. It's moments where you think about it's beautifully written, and you love the journey. It also just takes you back as well, and it really hits you, and it's the emotion, it's the laughter. And obviously the sadness and the situation and what happened. So I loved it absolutely. I'm loving it, still loving it. By the way, I'm still
finished it.
So I haven't finished it yet. I don't want to finish it, right? So I want it to continue, but there's so many things. And then I talked about this to John this evening about the sliding doors moment, especially because of rugby and the community. And I was always going to meet John at some point. I'm passing old Actonians for 6 years playing for Wasps, and to now be part of that journey and know the history now because of the book, and look forward with the future and all the fundraising and the club, the old Actonians, and knowing the guys from that. We feel privileged to be a part of it. Quite frankly, and it's so I'm still on that journey. I'm loving the book. It's absolutely superb.
Fantastic, and it licks along at quite a pace, doesn't it? I mean, it's a bit of a page turner, I have to say, and nice short chapters for me. So I was well pleased with that. But look, you played for many amateur clubs, John. Now you're going to test me here. Redruth, Truro, Newtonians in Leicestershire. Yeah. And obviously the mighty old A's. Have I missed any?
Cornwall.
Oh, obviously Cornwall. Yes, gosh, crikey, with the shirt and everything. Andy, I know many people who played with John were watching tonight. How important are the lower league clubs to the game of rugby?
Well, for us, as ex-professionals, they're massive because that's where it started for us, and where you fall in love with the game. So I was lucky to be born into a family that loved rugby. So that was, even though I wanted to play football and I loved other sports, it was, you're still going to try rugby, and I'm still taking you on a Sunday morning. And I think what struck me, as a youngster, rugby was a very physical sport, obviously. Even, early on, very, very physical. And some of the anecdotes in the book, of the forward mauls and the scrums where, John, I had no idea you were a prop as well. I was like, wow. I thought you were skillful and playing in the back row. But that sort of that at a young age, the physicality of the game can put people off, but it's the team around you that keep you going. And a lot of people sort of give up the sport, and I think quite frankly, we all could have given up at a certain stage. I think the junior rugby club and the community, as Jason alluded to, kind of bring you back in. So, and with my father setting up a mini rugby club, we moved to an area that didn't. On a Sunday, we turned up and there was no mini rugby, and my father then sort of lobbied around, put posters up, come and remember the poster that you saw that nobody else kind of saw, I guess. And
your club
a few Antipodeans and a few other, but nobody else saw it. We did the same with the mini rugby, and literally we're driving to the club Sunday mornings, and you would stop and there's a kid kicking a can down the street or about to get into a fight, and you drag them and say, come and play rugby. And I think that's the start of, community, being part of a team. Rugby, and I'm involved in a few charities around rugby. The rugby is a complicated game. It's a physical game, but that's not the value of rugby, actually. The value of the rugby is the rules and, the team. And it's a game for all shapes and sizes, all skill levels, and you're part of this team. The thing that you can do, and in John's, had to push in the scrum element, you had to step up, and you had a role to play in that team, and then somebody else has another role. Irrelevant if you're not very good at anything else, it's a really important, and that raises your confidence and your self-esteem, and also just the physicality of the game and being fit. You have to be extremely fit, and that helps as well. So. The junior club scene, grassroots, is the foundation of rugby. It's not the professional game. It is the bedrock of where the professional stars come from.
And I've just realised, both of you have just got daughters, haven't you?
Yes.
So are any of the daughters playing rugby, dare I ask?
I did have my second eldest was captain at Reading Uni.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
She absolutely lives for rugby.
What position?
She was a flanker.
Was she? Height? Got your height and your strength?
No.
And how about you, Andy? Your
Not
girls?
yet.
Not yet.
They may
well
do.
A bit younger, aren't they?
Yeah, a bit younger. Yeah. But I did an event on the hallowed turf at Twickenham, and I took my girls, and they were quite young, and we were teaching the kids for clients on the pitch, and they were playing touch rugby, and I got them. And they kind of stood in the middle of Twickenham, and I was, gave it the big, this was Daddy's office back in the day. They didn't really care.
Right,
it was like, whatever, Dad. and the mini rugby was going on around them, and they just saw people flying around, and eventually they kind of got into it. And you could just see, because it's kind of chaos, isn't it? Rugby is chaos, and it's frightening. And it was a really good experience for them. But they play lacrosse now, so that's pretty physical.
Well, that's a fairly brutal sport.
It's probably worse than rugby.
Yeah, that's like a hockey ball in the air.
Yeah.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Now, you haven't yet written a book. Have you been inspired by reading John's? Do we think that you might be possibly penciling something at this point?
Well, I'm a back, and I don't know whether I can compete with the forwards. How they write so well. Possibly. I think I was lucky enough to be a co-commentator for once I retired, and I was always very, very specific in how I co-commentated, and it was always, you talked about half glass full, it was always positive. And I hated as a player the commentator saying he's not having a good game, when it's clear as day and obvious. And it's not nice hearing that. So I was always wanting to be positive. So if I was to write anything, it would have to have that positive connotation and a great narrative, good story to it. So possibly, and the point being, I didn't until I
pick this up. Yes. I always want to ask people before they write their books, what's the story that you know and love but just wouldn't make it to the publishers for various reasons? I'm sure you've got many that you couldn't include in here. But I better not ask you, actually, because we could be here a bit longer than we expect.
It's going to be 50 Shades of Samson.
And how about you? Have you got a couple of stories there?
There's lots. But one in particular does involve Jason. Is he still listening, by the way?
I hope so.
I did notice he had a glass of wine.
He did have a glass of wine. I noticed that too.
So when we celebrated the big win in 2003 in Australia, we had a couple of days of drinking, and Jason is at the front of the queue and the last in. To order the drinks, and it's always a great night out with Big Jace at the Fun Bus. So what you don't want on a hangover is to sit next to Jason for 24 hours on a plane when all you want to do is get some sleep and actually just drink water. So I don't think Jason knows this, so that's probably one of the reasons I wouldn't put it in the book, but I'm happy to, in the presence of John, tell this story. My roommate for a lot of the World Cup was Josh Lucy, and we were in alphabetical order, so Lucy, Leonard, and Josh being a back the same as me, we couldn't compete with Jason. So we chose to, early on in the flight, get a gin and tonic with Jason and celebrate with him. And some of the big games, we used to have sleeping tablets before a big game, just to get, so the doctor would give us a sleeping tablet. So we put about 3 or 4 sleeping tablets, crushed them up and put them in Jason's drink, thinking that it would knock him unconscious and that we would get some sleep and that would be it. He lasted the whole flight on the way home. It didn't work, and he still to this day doesn't know. He must have slept for 2 days afterwards, though, once he landed.
You're dead.
If you're listening, Joe, sorry about that. That's why you had a big hangover at the end of the flight.
And of course, Josh Lacey's in Cornwall, isn't he? Or he lives in Cornwall.
He was. In fact, he was director at Cornish Pirates.
He was, wasn't he?
And he had a great fish and chip shop for a while.
He did have a great fish and chip shop. Yes, and what a beautiful part of the world that is. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Now, are you okay to stay here for a while? That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Andy. And so now's a good time, actually, for me to remind you guys watching at home, if you've got any questions for John, please do put them into the Q&A facility on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the hour. John, I just want to pick up on a couple of things that Andy's just raised there. So I must just reassure people who don't like rugby that the book isn't just about rugby. I will just put that out there. There's plenty of other great stories in there. But the one I want to pick up on is particularly the part of Old Actonians Rugby Club that you were part of for 12 years, I think, and the importance of this to you. It was a pivotal time in your life, and you talk about it in the book. Can you take us back to the day you walked through those gates?
Yeah, it was a bit... I'd been looking around for a club for a while. I'd been going home to Cornwall every other weekend to play, and that's unsustainable if you're working in London, really. And I'd been looking around and saw this sign on a tube station platform, "Your club needs you," and I thought, well, that's quite innovative. So I went along and explored this place, and the scene that greeted me when I eventually found the players, having been insulted by the head steward and the groundsman beforehand, was just total chaos. And gut feelings are a lot in life, and I could easily have walked away. But I just thought, there's something about this place. And it's a bit like Andy's sliding doors analogy. I could have moved on. Maybe I would have found a different club, a better playing club. But I don't think I would have found as good a group of blokes. It was from the moment I settled in there, it was quite obviously going to be my home for 12 years.
And of course, you were captain there as well.
Yeah, I had a good spell.
You did. And there's a really emotional chapter actually in the book called Together, which I just want to ask you about that, because within that chapter, you are actually taking the words from others. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was a really difficult chapter to write, because part of my tenure as captain, obviously, you're on the field, you're captain on the day, but I was coaching as well before Andy Keys turned up. But it went much more beyond that. You get to know the individuals, and I never felt it was sort of my team and you do it this way or that way. It was really a group effort, and when those tragedies came along, and it was during the time that I was captain, it hit me hard as well, and I really felt that it was a very important part of the book. And so I rang Dave Duff first to say, Dave, I want to write about this episode within the book. How do you feel? And I mean, Dave's a great mate, and we've enjoyed great times together. And he didn't put the phone down on me, but it was a very short conversation. And he said, I'll ring you back. And I didn't hear anything more for 2 or 3 days. And I thought, I've really upset him. I shouldn't have phoned and reminded him of those times. And then 3 days later, I got the most beautiful email from him describing what you read in the book. And I thought at that point, the only way that I can really approach the writing of this chapter is to speak directly with the players and their wives. And I did use their narrative in 2 or 3 sections of that. And I think it really drives it home. I just had no idea what Dave and Jeanette went through.
And I mean, there's some lovely descriptions of people supporting one another, the taps on the shoulder, the fact that the actual clubhouse was such an important place to be and to congregate and be with your friends and mates. And I mean, the rugby kind of thing's immaterial at that point. It's just felt like a really, important place to be.
Definitely, but it also galvanised everyone. I think we all wanted to do good things together for those guys. And it was a pivotal time in the club's history. I think we really became very close as a group at that time.
Now, in the book, you do talk about your childhood. Andy's already mentioned it already this evening, and you were sadly bullied at school. Looking back on those days, was there any good to come from those bullying experiences?
Well, I think when I found the ability to fight back, I suddenly realised it wasn't one-way traffic. And there was one scene where I was able to push away what I called 2 of this chap's henchmen, and I thought, blimey, I'm really not that downtrodden after all. Okay, he got the better of me that day, but it was the formative time of your life. It could have gone quite badly wrong if I'd let it get on top of me, but it was really getting back to the rugby that it almost dovetailed with the bullying. My PE teacher, Harold Stevens, who was another lovely man, just said to me, I don't want to see you fighting. If you want to fight, do it on the rugby pitch. And those sort of simple instructions, and I can see something in you, and you slowly gain your confidence. And then it was a matter of shedding the weight and getting my physique a little bit more in shape.
And you do talk later on in the book, when you talk about your MS, and you really do dig down to sometimes those days where you were fighting off things that were happening in your life that weren't great. It feels like there's a real deep connection. You've learned or you've taught yourself.
I think of rugby drills and situations, virtually every situation that challenges me during the day. So I think there's a bit in the book about me. It sounds as though I'm scrummaging, but I'm not. I'm actually just trying to get out of bed. And that happens to me every day. In the morning, my carer will give me physio whilst I'm lying in bed. but I always imagine when I'm pushing with my legs that I'm scrummaging. Or if I'm trying to do sit-ups, I can imagine it was a drill that we were doing at the scrunchies or something at the rugby club. So I've found a way of garnering those memories to my benefit these days, although it is a losing battle ultimately, but it sustains me for the moment.
Now, another childhood sport that you talk about fondly is fishing. And I have a little boy who actually likes fishing. I don't know much about fishing, but your book is beautifully, the fishing described in your book actually had me laughing out loud one particular chapter. Now, there was a particular sports shop called John Langdon's, which you ended up getting a job in, but you also set up the Truro Trout and Freshwater Fishing Club, no less.
Yeah.
So I want to know, if I was going to walk into, I don't think Langdon's unfortunately exists anymore, but if I was to walk in there when you were working there, what would I have seen? What was the scene?
It was absolutely amazing place. If you were a child, you would have loved it, but it seemed as though all adults loved it as well. It was guns, it was fishing tackle, it was models, it was train sets, it was bicycles, it was tools. It was absolutely, well, I say a male dream, but we were full of ladies that went fishing as well. But it was like time stood still in the place, and when I became part of the staff for 5 or 6 years part-time and saw the place develop, and they started taking walls down to make it bigger and finding rooms that were hidden away behind old cobblestone walls. It was quite an amazing place, something like an Indiana Jones would find.
Wow. And you met a particularly significant chap who I'd love to have met, and sadly he's not with us anymore, but you call him the rather unremarkable Bert Monk. Yeah. But I want to know about how that particular friendship developed, and tell me about his car. Please tell me about his car.
Yeah, he was a remarkable guy. He'd always had his family holidays in Cornwall. So he loved Cornwall, but I think he actually came from Purley. Mm-hmm. And when he retired, they decided, him and his wife, to move to Truro. And he just hobbled into the shop one day and came up to the counter where I was working and said, young man, I'm looking at starting sea fishing. Can you advise me? And as I started to tell him, I could hear all the guys, the experienced anglers on the other side of the shop, giggling away, because I knew how to fish, but I didn't really know how to show them all the detailed rigs. So I suggested to him that we went and did him a little sort of, showed him how to fish in Truro that evening, me and the guy that I worked in the shop with, Kenny. And from there, the three of us became great mates over 3 or 4 years. And Bert said, well, why don't I take you, we'll go out to the coast if you can't get to the coast. I'll pick you and Ken up tonight, because we both lived on the same estate. And when Bert, who was well into his 70s, I was expecting him to turn up in an old clapped out Rover or something. And it was a Mark III fluorescent green Cortina with wide wheels. And it looked so sexy until Bert got out of it. He's a wonderful man. Just a lovely guy.
And he actually gave you some fairly good advice about your career, didn't he, in terms of where to go next?
Yeah, in fact, it was the same for Ken as well. We were both the same sort of age. We did reasonably well at school, and we were going to carry on working at the shop. Mm-hmm. And he just took us to one side and said, I think it was his nephew that had flunked his exams. He said, we'd cut off an arm to get what you guys have got. You've got to do something with it. And in saying that, he knew full well that he was breaking up our little gang of 3. But it was the best advice I ever had, really. I would have stayed in Truro, and I would have been very happy in Truro. But, look where I am now. It's the same old sliding doors thing, Andy,
And you were the first person in your family to go to university, and you went to Leicester, you got qualified as a chartered surveyor. I think we've got a few surveyors watching this evening. So take me back. What was the surveying landscape like in the sort of late 80s, early 90s?
Best you ask your husband.
I should do, shouldn't I? No, your book's so much more interesting.
Well, one thing I would say is you do a degree and you think, you know a fair bit, but in fact, once you start working life, you know diddly squat. And the West End was not a place for a country boy. And I was put down a fair bit, even by the female staff that were hurrah Henrys, I suppose you would call them. It was a bit of an eye-opener. And it took me a while to find my feet as a surveyor, but mainly because I didn't like London. Eventually I met a really good guy who obviously became my business partner, Marcus, who was initially my mentor, sort of father figure, but eventually became a great friend, godfathers to each other's children. And I found my way forward through Mark. I did go to another company for 2 or 3 years.
Is that where you met
That's where I met Two Shirts Tony.
I have to say, I laughed out loud at that bit as well, because I knew a 10-pint Tony, but you know a 2 shirts Tony. So tell me what's with the 2 shirts Tony?
Yeah, well, as you know, Cornish people generally don't have sartorial elegance, and I certainly didn't. And Tony joined probably 2 years after I did at this other practice. And it wasn't announced to me that he was arriving. And I turned up one morning and he was sitting on the opposite side of the room to me. And he was quite a snappy dresser. And I just thought, why on earth would a bloke wear 2 shirts to work? Anyway, came in a couple more days. He still had 2 shirts on. And in the end, I had to ask him, why are you wearing 2 shirts? He goes, no, it's not, mate. It's Italian designer, innit? And I had no idea at all.
Well, it had one of those collars that looked like it was underneath another.
So he's always been known affectionately as Tony 2 Shirts.
As Tony 2 Shirts.
Even though now he is probably Tony 1,000 Shirts, because he's so good at what he does.
Is he?
So, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I think we might be getting some questions. I'm not entirely sure. I'm waiting for them to pop up. Oh, here we go. So we've been obviously asking people to type their questions in as we've been going along. I've got a couple here that people have sent in earlier, but I'm going to ask you this question here from Stumble. So Hammers, who would you like to play you in the Hollywood version of your book?
Jason Leonard, I would think. What was a film star?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I quite like Hugh Jackman, I think.
He's great.
Bit of the old Wolverine.
Yeah.
He's a bit taller than me, though, isn't he?
Yeah. I think that would be great. Yes, absolutely. I can see that.
It's got to be a young Hambly, though, isn't it?
It's got to be a young Hambly.
Probably. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know any youngsters, really. Do you, Andy?
No.
Don't fancy being in the film then? We've got Bob Jones here saying, John, you've been a great source of inspiration to many people. Have you achieved all your aims, and what would you like your legacy to be?
Have I achieved all my aims? So I feel as though I have in terms of the Samson Centre.
Yeah.
We've, along with the kayak club and the divers, we've developed the plot. And it works extremely well for all 3 groups. So I don't think there's an awful lot more that we can do in terms of developing the facility. But I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is, because of COVID, is keeping our heads above water. It's a phenomenal challenge financially. Yeah. Luckily, Robin, who's just taken over as chairman, has a financial background and is incredibly businesslike, the way the charity is being run. So I have no worries on that front. There was another part of the question?
Yes, the other part. Pardon?
Legacy.
Yeah.
Legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other part of the question was, do I have any more aspirations, was it?
I don't know. Now you got me.
Yeah, I think the legacy is there. I mean,
yeah. So the Samson Centre.
It's not my legacy. The group, the team that have built it, all the trustees, all the members. Down to my mother and a few other older people that have given a £5 every Christmas. A lot more. Some people. They're the people that it belongs to be honest.
And have you got, I think the other bit was about the aims. Have you got more aims out there that you want to?
Yeah, we did have a 5-year strategy plan where we were looking at trying to build another satellite operation, which was probably going to be out of Guildford. But, this isn't the climate at the moment to be doing it. Yeah. But, it may come. Yeah. But I've got to have the energy to do it. And at the moment, that's probably not possible.
Yeah. We have got here from somebody, what's John's favourite playing memory? What's your favourite playing memory?
It's got to be putting on the county shirt, really, as a 18-year-old.
Yeah.
I didn't realise what it really meant to play. I knew what it meant to play rugby. It's a gladiatorial, and it's fundamentally, you're going out there and you're waging war for 80 minutes. But putting on the county shirt was a really proud moment. I don't know whether I would have played a much more senior level. It's difficult to say because I didn't stay in the county, but that for me would have been one of the most memorable moments.
And were your mum and dad there for that?
Well, that's the odd thing, really. My mother and my father didn't like the idea of me playing rugby. And my brother played as well, but they never came and watched us. Even when I played for the county, Mother was quite apprehensive. Mum's fantastic, typical Mediterranean sort of firebrand. And she did actually come and watch us play on tour when I took the team down to Truro. I don't think you've probably got to that chapter yet, Andy, but I got raked quite badly by all my mates from Truro.
Oh my goodness.
And my mother ran on the pitch, named them all, screamed at everybody, got escorted off the pitch by the ref.
Brilliant.
You've got to love it, haven't you?
Well, that's a mother for you. You see, she's protecting her lad. Is she watching tonight?
It'll be taped and then shown to her tomorrow. I think.
Fantastic, fantastic. I've also got a question here that we took earlier today, and it says here, truly inspirational. Where do you get your drive from when the vast majority of us would have given up faced with the challenges that you have?
It's very odd, that, isn't it? I don't know, to be honest. I stay awake a lot at night because the MS irritates me. And rather than huffing and puffing, I try and think. And providing I don't get too dozy and forget it all, I then go and tap it into the computer in the morning as to what I might want to get on with that day. I don't have any, I can't give any golden answer to where the drive comes from, but I do get what I call in the book nocturnal nudging, where I'm just not being allowed to rest.
Wow.
I'm getting all sorts of ideas where I just can't sleep. And that happened when the Samson Centre idea came up.
Yeah. Yes, and you describe that really nicely in the book. Yeah. How did you actually, when you came to writing, because obviously you were having these thoughts when you were in the oxygen chamber, did you just get back and then start typing, or did you dictate it? How did you do that?
One-fingered typing on a tablet. A lot of it is still sitting at home. I didn't use it. And I didn't flow either. It's not it may give the impression that there's a bit of flow to the book, but I got to a couple of stages where I felt I couldn't write any more. And it was only really down to my cousin Brian, who's a life coach now. He'd probably kill me for saying that. He's not a life coach, but he does some mentoring. And he quietly took me aside and said, look, you've got this far. Do you want to talk about it? And half an hour later, I was really ready to go again. He talked me around to getting started, and I don't think it really stuttered after that.
We've got here a question saying, tell us about Marion and her decision as the management. How does it feel to be number 5 in the pecking order? And that's from Alan McKelvey.
Alan, yes. I can't quite read the question.
So
Tell-
how does it feel to be number 5 in the pecking order? Of course, you've got 4 beautiful daughters and
Yeah.
your wonderful wife, and you've even got a female cat. I mean, honestly, John, you could have got a boy cat.
Well, that threw me actually, because I'm 6 in the pecking order
Well, you are,
with Marion
really?
and 4 daughters.
Yes, true.
So,
true.
Alan, you're an accountant. You should be able to.
That's a worry, Alan.
Yeah.
That's a worry.
No, I'm a pretty easygoing sort of bloke, and anything to keep the peace. I'm sure Andy would go along with that.
Do you have any male, other than yourself, any male animals in your house?
My daughter felt sorry for me, so she got a male hamster.
A male hamster.
It's macho.
I know. Embarrassing.
And it's still alive?
Yes.
It's still got the hamster.
Yes.
Fantastic. Another question here. Are you going to do an audiobook for us lazy North? I don't think I'm going to say that, actually. Are you going to do an audiobook?
That would be difficult, wouldn't it? Audiobook being one of these talking books.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you can record yourself reading your book. I mean, you can do it that way.
I could do it in Cornish, couldn't I?
You could do it. Well, there we are.
you
I
go.
think we might have just had a breakthrough moment.
It would start off as what it was.
Well,
That would be
Cornish
the
accent. I
opening.
thought you were going to be impressive and actually speak some Cornish then.
That was actually.
Oh, was it?
I think we would probably need more of a demand for the book to go audio, but yeah, I'm sure it can be done.
I mean, I think actually, and being serious for a minute, it is a way that people consume content now. You know, if you're driving or you're on on your bike or whatever, and you've got so audio is actually probably quite a good idea. Just thinking, maybe
okay.
that's the next thing.
That's the next thing, isn't it?
We'll
Next project.
We'll get on to that once we finish here. Here we go from Anne. If you were to meet the young man who bullied you so badly at school, what would you say to him now?
Well, actually, I did meet him again, didn't I? It's in the book, and I don't know whether you got to that chapter, Andy, but I had the chance to wreak a bit of retribution, and I hovered over his head for a millisecond, and then quietly put my boot to the side of his head.
I did read that, yeah.
And I looked down at him and thought, well, I've got rid of you now. That was all that was needed. And what was Anne's question? Was would I get him back?
Well, would you do anything? Would you do anything differently?
No, I
if you
don't
were
think
to-
I would. I think I've matured enough to. I mean, that's not the only incidence of bullying you'll get in your life. You're going to get people in a business environment that try and get one over on you. And I was always one for trying to be. To forgive people, but sometimes you just got to get your own back, haven't you? And that happens on a rugby pitch as well. I wasn't a dirty player, but I wouldn't like to see any of the teammates getting a pounding. So occasionally you'd get stuck in. So
Now, in the process of putting this launch together, you've had so many lovely emails and Facebook messages from people who've read the book. Did you ever think your book would touch people in the way it has?
no, not at all. When I set off writing it was more cathartic for me, really. I felt as though I was getting a lot off my chest. It was using up the hour and a half or whatever it was in the chamber, and it was only really after I'd sent a few chapters initially to Brian, actually my cousin, and he said, there is something there, why don't you keep going? And the problem I had was that I wrote the chapters not sequentially time-wise, so I ended up thinking I just had a ragtag bunch of chapters, but actually when I started to put them all alongside each other, I could see that there were themes, there were connections from chapter to chapter, and it became a process I just felt I had to finish.
Well, it was a wonderful process, and I have to say there's a lot of people out there who are going to be super grateful that you did, because it's a beautiful read.
Thank you.
I can't quite believe it, John, but we've come to the end of the hour.
Really?
I know.
Amazing.
I
Thank
know.
you.
I'd just like to thank both Jason Leonard and Andy Gomersall for their contribution tonight. And I'd also like to thank Aztec for donating generously this beautiful studio that we've been in this evening, and of course their technical expertise. And of course a big thank you to you at home for tuning in and watching this virtual book launch. Samson Rising is available from Amazon, Waterstones and United Writers, and it's also available digitally on Amazon Kindle and Apple iBooks. And I should just add that £1 from every purchase goes directly to the Samson Centre. So not only do you get to have an absolutely uplifting read, you're also generously donating to that wonderful centre in Guildford. Finally, I want to thank the true inspirational gentleman sitting right beside me here, John Hambly. Samson Rising is a beautiful, poetic stroll through one man's remarkable life experiences. Bright and comical, yet tender and deeply moving. Samson Rising is a heartfelt true story of a Cornish lad who found inspiration through sport and strength in adversity. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.